roots of a new cocoa variety that has a better quality, a better yield, particularly in the area of Sulawesi. We do have a similar program on coffee, where we have a factory in Sumatra, where we are already sourcing 100% of our needs locally. But again, as the Indonesian economy moves forward, we need to produce more. When it comes to palm oil, we are working with an NGO, the Forest Trust, an important partner for us to work with suppliers. And it's not just about giving new guidelines and only we start taking supplies when these guidelines are met, but we work with these parties in the field. And this is a very important part of our activities, which we call creating shared value. You're talking about earlier on creating value. For us, it is not doing business by just putting up a plant, importing raw materials. Yes, we are a commercial company. We have to create value for our shareholders, but at the same time, we also need to create value for the society, for the community with whom we operate. Most of our factories in the emerging countries are in the rural areas, so it's these kind of activities, working with farmers, working with communities. A quick word on energy. We are obviously large users of energy and water. When it comes to energy, green gas emissions, in the last 10 years, worldwide, our business has increased 73% in volume, but we have been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 16% in absolute terms. This has been thanks to new technologies, cogenerations in our factory, tackling heat and power at the same time. There's a lot more happening in this area. When it comes to total energy reductions in the last 5 years on a per ton of product produced, we have been able to reduce by 35% our energy consumption, by 32% our water consumption. And these are all new technologies that we're working with universities, with both internal and outside expertise. A final word on waste. In the agricultural supply chain, there is an enormous amount of waste taking place. This can be as high as 30 to 40%, in some cases 60%. An example in Nigeria, 10 years ago, where we buy a lot of corn to produce some of our cereal products, up to 60% of the corn had to be rejected because of mycotoxins, infections. We have been working with these farmers, with the cooperatives. Today, 10 years later, our rejection rate is 1.5%. So these are examples. It can be achieved. In the Western world, when it comes to waste, on average, a human being has an intake of about 3,000 to 3,500 kilocalories per day. In the Western world, as high as 1,400 kilocalories of food are wasted on a daily basis. This is equivalent to 1/4 of the total fresh water that is being consumed to produce food. So this is mind-boggling, this kind of waste that is taking place. And here again, there is an enormous need to have education campaigns and to really explain and make it clear that this is not sustainable. And so all these activities I just mentioned in the few minutes, it's all about working together with industry, government, civil society, NGOs. What is important is that in every country there is a vision, and here clearly the government plays an important role, but then that we are all aligned, not just keep on talking, let the house burn down, as was explained earlier, but really get together in task forces, in working groups, and work together towards solving many of these challenges. I'm a big believer it can be done.
Thank Thank you. Peggy, these guys are all for profit, and they are sort of limited by the shareholders' request of them returning some of the investments. You come into this issue from a different angle. So in terms of creating value from a business point of view, what do you think are the biggest challenges, and what does this issue, how does this issue look from your angle?
So I think this panel is about transformation. I think it's about how do we as a society adapt to the global challenges that we're facing. And I think nowhere else in the world are we seeing such large changes happen so quickly as in China today in the clean energy space and really the food, energy, water nexus. JUICE is a nonprofit that is trying to accelerate the greening of China. And what we do is work with government, with corporations, with all different sectors, academics, media, celebrities, bringing them together to work to create tipping points in key drivers of energy use. So in China, our action plan to create large-scale transformation is pretty clear once I describe it. So there's 4 major drivers of energy use that we see. One is urbanization. Today, China is facing massive amounts of urbanization from rural to cities. We will end up with, probably in 20 years, 12 cities with 60 million people or more. That's 350 million people moving into cities over the next 20 years. And during this time, we'll probably build 50,000 new skyscrapers, 170 new mass transit systems, probably 2 Manhattans of new floor space each year. So it's a lot of infrastructure. The second major driver of energy use is industry. 70% of our energy use in China is used by industry, and half of that is used by export goods, half of that is used by heavy industry. So to the extent that we can create factory energy efficiency, we can move the needle of energy use in China. The third is consumption. Today, China's middle class is growing from pretty much a place of zero to a place where people are starting to buy Louis Vuittons and going abroad to travel. As our living standards increase in China, we face increasing energy use as well. So the question that we're trying to answer is how do we create a China dream and follow a different aspirational lifestyle instead of blindly follow a Western lifestyle, which will inevitably increase our energy use per capita by 5 times. The last one is the grid. So we've been working on smart grids since the inception of JUICE 4 years ago. Bringing in two-way communication into the traditional grid really will revolutionize everything about electricity use. In the 2/3, you probably know that 2/3 of energy use is lost between generation and use. So those, to us, are 4 major drivers of energy use that we target. Now in China, we create change in a slightly different manner than other countries because of the government infrastructure. So today, China, you may or may not realize, is already very interested in going green from the top down. So everything about the laws in China assumes that climate change exists, assumes that man made this, assumes that China has to do its part to rectify this. So it's really not about creating a change in intent in China today. China today is very different China than 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago. It's really a different country. So today the problem is how do we bring solutions to China that it can implement at large scale? And so I'll give you an example of the work that we're doing in China with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development to train mayors across China. So far, to date, we've trained over 200 mayors. This year, we'll probably train another 50 or 80 mayors on how to build sustainable cities. And we bring in companies like GE to Philips to McKinsey, Covanta, et cetera, to talk about solutions, waste, sorry, is that me? Waste, water, transport, energy, buildings, etc. So we're bringing solutions to the people that can make the fastest change within the region. So our 200 mayors that we've trained probably represent over 400 million people, and many instances of them coming into class for 2 weeks to a month at a time, listening to our speakers. There's many cases of them then going back and implementing programs. So this is an example of how if you work with the right channels in China,